everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How do different countries make decisions on reimbursing new medicines? My name is Monika Rakovica, and I'm an Access and Policy Manager with Myeloma Patients Europe. Our agenda for today, after a welcome and introduction, I will give the floor to our speaker, Tom Belleman. He will talk about how different countries in the EU, in Europe, make decisions on reimbursing new medicines. That would be followed by a session with question and answers, and we'll wrap up and close around 1 hour and a half in total. A few housekeeping rules. If you haven't been in any other webinars organized by MPE, but a reminder for those that have, you should be able to see and hear the presenters. You will not be able to see and hear any other attendees. If you cannot hear the presenters, make sure that your speakers are not muted, that the volume is also set high. To pose any questions, please do use the Q&A window, which is found on the toolbar at the bottom of the window to pose any questions. You can also click on the like button to upvote any questions that you might find interesting. There will also be a Q&A session. So as I mentioned, there will be a Q&A session after the presentation. Please write your question in the chat and I will ask them on your behalf. You can also use the chat window to chat with other participants and to share any other comments. If you're having trouble with poor video or with the signal cutting out, please try and attending in audio mode only. And if you're facing any other technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat function and someone from the MPE team will reach out to you. I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, will be available on the MPE website and social media channels. It will also be available on the Horizon Europe ASCERTAIN website and the social media channels of this project. Since I've been mentioning the ASCERTAIN and you've seen the ASCERTAIN logo on each of the slides, a couple of words about this project. It's a EU-funded Horizon Europe project started in 2023, set to finish in 2026. The acronym of it is affordability and sustainability improvements through new pricing, cost effectiveness, and reimbursement models to appraise innovative health technologies. It is the 4-year project consortium led by Erasmus University, and it aims to create policy tools to promote access to medicines for patients no matter where they live. A couple of words about the patient involvement in this project because it is an important focus of it. Myeloma Patients Europe is a partner in the consortium. It works with all packages and within all work packages to help promote patient understanding and to seek feedback from patient and patient advocates on the result of the project. The project also is overseen by an advisory board that will check the progress of work and includes a representative of various patient organizations. Why focus on reimbursement? Why do we believe that reimbursement is important for patient and patient advocates? For once, it is an important part of an overall market access process. It includes the final decision on whether a medicine becomes accessible and it's covered by a particular healthcare system. In our experience, patients generally do not know much about reimbursement being complex and several steps being not exactly transparent. And we believe that understanding this is important for focusing advocacy efforts in improving access to therapies. I'd like to mention that this is today's webinar is a part of a series introducing ASCERTAIN concepts for patients. We already have another webinar as part of this series. We had it last year on the basics of medicine pricing, and you're able to find this on the YouTube channel of MPE. Now, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today, Tom Belleman. He's a PhD candidate at the Erasmus School of Health Policy and Management, Erasmus University Rotterdam, within the Health Technology Assessment Department. His research focuses on cost effectiveness and market access reimbursement of innovative health technology with a focus on oncology. Tom also holds a bachelor degree in biomedical sciences from Vrije University Amsterdam and a master degree in health economics, policy and law from Erasmus University Rotterdam. I will stop sharing then, and Tom,
and I
you
will
have
start
the
sharing.
floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Monica, for your introduction. And thank you all for joining us today on the webinar, How Do Different Countries Make Decisions on Reimbursing of New Medicines? So before I start, I want to introduce ASCERTAIN a little bit further to you all, and by mentioning the aim of ASCERTAIN, the focus, and what ASCERTAIN will develop. So currently, many countries struggle with affordability of new medicines and also of medical devices because they're often very costly. And this could lead to inequalities in access to these health technologies over Europe. So in this slide, ASCERTAIN aims to improve the accessibility and affordability of new medicines and new medical devices in Europe. And we try to do this with the development of new economic and policy tools. So ASCERTAIN focus lays on three different areas in the field of health economics. Well, the first focus is on pricing. And the price of a medicine isn't just about how much it costs to produce. It also reflects the value it brings to patients, healthcare systems, and society. In ASCERTAIN, we're working on new models to help define what a fair price could be. So the next focus is on the cost effectiveness and value assessment. Try to answer the question, is the medicine worth the money? So this is not done only by looking at the treatment cost, but also which value it can add, for instance, in health, longer life, or improved quality life for the patients. So in ASCERTAIN, we aim to make models that are more transparent and fairer in order to do this assessment. And the last focus is the reimbursement and market access, where we are focusing on today, of course. So because after a medicine is approved, it's not automatically available to patients. Each country decides if and how it will pay for the medicine. This decision depends on many factors, for instance, the medicine's value, cost, and the priorities of the healthcare system itself. So in ASCERTAIN, we're working to understand and to improve these processes so that patients can get faster access to the treatments they will need. So what will ASCERTAIN then develop? So we try to develop new economic models and also policy tools on the three areas of focus, so pricing, cost effectiveness, and reimbursement, in order to improve the accessibility and affordability of these new medicines and medical devices. So this development will be in a cooperation with different stakeholders, such as the industry, policymakers, payers, and patients, to make sure the models and tools are of good quality and are functional to use in order to have a positive impact on the practice. So the end product of ASCERTAIN is an open access online tool which will combine the economic models and policy tools. This online tool will help to assess costs, values, and also the affordability of the new medicines and medical devices. And the tool will be adaptable for the different European countries and settings and will be made user-friendly for all different stakeholders groups. So let's move from ASCERTAIN to today's webinar. So on how do the different countries in Europe make decisions on reimbursing new medicines. So today I will talk about three different themes. The first theme is about the development of medicines until the patient access. So a little bit about the life cycle of a medicine. So this will set the scene of today, where in the life cycle of a medicine do reimbursement and market access take place, which procedures or processes happen around reimbursement and market access, and when do patients actually get access to the medicines. The second part will be about the processes of market access, the differences in policies, and the difference in possible access. So I will take you in this part through the pathways, processes, and procedures involved in market access and reimbursement. We'll look at how market access and reimbursement decisions were made, what policy differences there exist between countries, and for you to hopefully understand that these differences can lead to inequalities in patient access and delays in availability of new medicines. And for the last part, I'm going to take you a little bit to the EU HTA and its role in market access. So in this part, we'll take a closer look at the EU HTA and its potential role in the market access in countries. So I'll explain the goals of the EU HTA regulation, the procedures involved, and its role in the national market access and the reimbursement processes. So hopefully afterwards you have a better understanding of market access and reimbursement processes and how this could lead to differences over countries in terms of access. So to start and to set the scene, I'll start with the part from development to patient access by taking you into a part of the life cycle of the drug. So to start with this, I'm first going to show you a universal pathway and how the access for patients could look like. So the first step of such kind of pathway is the research and development, because a new medicine needs to be discovered, researched, and further developed. The second step in this process is the market authorization. Market authorization is necessary in order to sell a certain medicine on the market, for instance, the market of Europe. And the next step is the step of market access. The step of market access is where decisions about reimbursement needs to be made on a country level. And when these steps are formally finished, medicines will become available to all patients. So how does the process look like in more detail? So the first step, the research and development. A medicine starts with the discovery, or in other words, a new idea for treating a disease. This can, for instance, be because there is a better understanding about how the disease works, the finding of new molecules, or the exploration of how existing drugs could work in another way, for instance, on a new indication. So to work from this idea, you need to test this first, and this can be tested in a preclinical setting. And this is known as the preclinical testing phase. So the medicine is studied in the lab to see if it behaves as it's expected to be and whether it appears to be safe. It is then tested on animals to assess its biological activity and to further check for safety concerns. So when this all positive and the preclinical testing phase is finished, we can move further to the clinical trials, where the testing will go further in humans. And the clinical trial typically includes 3 phases. So in the first phase, the medicine is tested in a small group of healthy volunteers to check its safety, understand side effects, and to find the right dose. And in the second phase, that's the phase 2, the medicine will be tested on patients in order to see if the medicine actually works and to continue monitoring the safety, and also the appropriate dose will also be further tested. And in the third phase, the medicine is tested in a larger group of patients, and it is tested if the medicine is better than existing treatments. They look at how well it works in the real world, how safe it is, and how it could affect patient life. So this is a quite long and complex process that often takes more than 10 years before a medicine is ready for the next step. And in this, the next step is the market authorization. So in order to get an official license, which grants a manufacturer to sell their medicine on the European market, an official approval is needed from the European Commission. And it takes approximately 1 year to get this license and therefore the market authorization and therefore the chance to sell your medicine on the market. So whether a medicine gets this license and therefore could be sold, an assessment of the European Medicine Agency, or the EMA, is necessary. So based on the research done in the research and development stage, the EMA assesses the safety, efficacy, and quality of new medicines. When the EMA looks at safety, they look at the question, is the medicine safe to use? So the EMA does this by looking for the potential benefits of the medicine are greater than its risks. For instance, by looking at the potential long-term risk or possible side effects. The efficacy is measured by looking whether the medicine works. This means that the new medicine must improve the condition it is meant for and is not worsening the health state of the patients. And the last, EMA looks at quality, and they look if the medicine is made properly. So to measure the quality, the medicine is assessed by looking if it meets the high standards of the European market in terms of the dosage and the stability of the drugs. So with a positive assessment of the EMA, the European Commission gives out a market license and therefore market authorization, meaning that the medicine could be saved on the market in Europe. And here I deliberately say could be sold because approval by the European Commission does not automatically mean national access for patients, or in other words, the market access. Each country needs to decide for themselves if a medicine will be reimbursed and therefore will be paid for, what the price will be and what they pay for, what the price will be that they pay for the medication, and which patients or patient groups the medicine can receive and which patient or patient group cannot receive this medicine. Because this is nationally regulated, the time it takes depends on the country themselves. This is due to the different policies on market access or by the given health priorities in that particular country. So in this part, we're going to dive deeper in today. But first, let me say that only after these important steps, a medicine will be available to the patients. So it is good to consider and understand that even after the market authorization is granted by the European Commission, medicines are not automatically available for patients. Only when national market access is granted, medicines will become available to the patients, and this depends on country-specific policies and procedures. So the process for a drug to become available to the patients is therefore quite an elaborate process. And let's give you two kind of statements to show you why this is so elaborate. The first one is that it can take up to 10 to 15 years from the discovery until the availability for patients. And most of the times it costs more than 50 years. And a second statement, it's also good to understand that the process is also not so straightforward as it seems. As from the 10,000 possible discoveries or potential lead for new medications, only one will eventually be approved by the EMA and is granted market authorization by the European Commission, meaning that along the way, a lot of leads for medicines have been withdrawn. So let's move further. Now I've shown you now the cycle of the medicine and where in the process the market access and reimbursement takes place. So we can go further and zoom in on the market access processes. So I want to start with showing you a very simplified, straightforward, and maybe also a somewhat universal pathway of how the market access and reimbursement take place. So I tried to say this very carefully because it's a national matter, the reimbursement and market access. So there are many differences over the countries, but I want to show you a little bit how it can look like and what the different steps in that process or pathway are. So mostly to start a national assessment and therefore the process for market access and reimbursement, a pharmaceutical company has to submit a dossier to the country of interest. In the next phase, the information of the dossier goes through a value assessment, or in other words, the health technology assessment, or in short, the HTA. So this is the process where national bodies evaluate how much benefit the medicine provides compared to, for instance, what's already available on their market. And the next step is negotiation. In the negotiation phase, the pharmaceutical company and most time the national payer discuss the price. And the negotiation, in the negotiation, the pharmaceutical company and the payer tries to balance the access for patients with financial sustainability for the healthcare system. And eventually, based on this value assessment, the negotiation and the outcome of the negotiation, a reimbursement decision is made. And the reimbursement decision is about whether the medicine will be covered by the national health system and therefore will be paid for, and also under what conditions will it be paid for. So let's move a little bit deeper into these different steps. So the first step was the dossier submission. And we can see that mostly in most of the cases as the starting point of the national assessment, and therefore the starting point for the market access and reimbursement process. So when a pharmaceutical company wants to get market access in the country, they need to submit a dossier to a national authority, and that can be an HTA body, the Ministry of Health, or for instance, to the health insurer, or a possible combination of these three. And the dossier consists of data on the medicine safety and efficacy, but also includes country-specific information, for instance, on cost, the expected added value. So that means how does the medicine perform in comparison with the medicines that are already on the market in that country, but can also consist of other information such as legal, ethical, or organizational information. So in the next step, the value assessments, or indeed the other words, the health technology assessments, HTA. And in this step, the added value of a medicine in the national context is being assessed based on the submitted dossier. So in addition to this dossier, expert input is mostly gathered, for instance, by involving clinicians or patients in order to get a broad view on the potential benefits of the new medicine. And these assessments are mostly done by HTA bodies. However, in countries with no official HTA, countries that have no official HTA bodies or processes, the Ministry of Health can do this, or national health insurers or advisory committees can take this process in their wallet. And most of the time, the central question in this assessment is how much value does a new medicine bring? And other questions to answer this one can be, how well does the medicine work? Is it better than the current treatment in our system? Does the benefit of the medicine justify its cost? And what will it cost the healthcare system overall? And can the healthcare system afford it? So, with the information from the dossier and the outcomes of the value assessment, the negotiation can take place. And the negotiation takes place between pharmaceutical companies and national payers. And national payers can be either health ministries or regulatory bodies assigned with this task, or insurance companies. So in the negotiation, the eventual price and possible other conditions will be discussed and eventually agreed upon. The agreed price is mostly attached to how well the medicine works, so how much value it can bring. So the negotiations are there in order to align every party's interests by making sure there's patient access to the medicine, but at an affordable price. And that all in order to keep the healthcare costs and its budgets sustainable. So eventually, from this, the reimbursement decision will be made. And this will be made based on outcomes of the value assessment, the negotiation, and also the negotiation outcomes. And the question which is central in the reimbursement decision is, will the healthcare system pay for this medicine? Of course, I need to say, when the value is not proved or the negotiation process leads to nothing, this decision could be made earlier along the way and will be, of course, then negative. But when everything is positive, then we say, all right, it's a positive reimbursement decision. We can grant market access, and therefore the medicine will become available to the different patients. And the reimbursement decision is mostly made by the health ministries, but also can be made by health insurers or reimbursement or pricing committees. And the reimbursement decision does not only include if it's being paid for, but also under which conditions. And these conditions could be, for instance, about who can receive the medicine. Is it everybody or only for a certain patient groups, ages, or disease stages? Or where can it be prescribed? for instance, only in hospitals or only by specialists? A further question, or a question that can be answered in the reimbursement decision, is, are there any restrictions on giving the medicine? For instance, can it only be prescribed when other treatment has failed? And also, the last question that will be answered is, will it be fully covered by the government or insurer, or is a partial out-of-pocket contribution from the patient necessary? So this process and the market access in this form seems to be quite simple and quite straightforward. As already shortly mentioned, this is not the case in practice, because market access and reimbursement is nationally regulated. Countries apply different methods, policies, and procedures to regulate this. This has led to differences over countries, how the market access processes look like and where the priorities lay. These differences lead to differences in time to access of new medicines over countries who could have access to new medicines, or even having access at all to a medicine. So just to shortly show you anything about this and the differences between time to access and access at all in Europe, I will show you, or I want to show you this graph. And this graph is of an in 2020 published paper. And here we can see the average time of access of 12 different oncology medicines. The measure's time is from the moment the medicine received market authorization by the European Commission after a positive assessment by the EMA until the medicine gained market access. So in this graph, we can see that there is a big difference between countries in the average time to access for medicines that have received market access. However, some medicines have also not received market access at all in some countries. So, for instance, Germany has an average time to access of 17 days. And in Germany, all of the 12 researched oncology medicines were on the market. However, the country which has the highest time to access was Estonia. They had an average on 1,187 days. And even 8 of the 12 oncology medicines that were researched were not on the market. So this shows that there's quite some differences in time to access. And one way to explain these differences in these time for access, and maybe also the market access differences or in differences in pathways, is by looking at the differences in policies and regulations. Because we often see the same steps of these simple pathway of market access, but different rules are applied of these countries. For instance, we see many differences in the actors involved in the processes. So are they HTA agency? Does the ministry, does the negotiation, or is it the insurer? Is the insurer the one that has the final call or not? Also, the order of the steps can vary over countries. However, these steps could also be different inside of countries. So, and also, does the steps have to follow each other up, or could the steps happen at the same time? Also, the criteria for the reimbursement decision differ, meaning that how the added value is assessed is different. Timelines are different, and also in some countries there is a national and a regional approval necessary in order to get the market access and patient availability. So to show you a little bit about this, I'm going to start with showing you examples of 3 different countries, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. And I'm going to show you how their market access and reimbursement pathways look like, and show you how this could lead to either quicker or delayed market access. So start with Germany. And in Germany, the market access procedures is called the AMNOG procedures. These procedures are led by the most important bodies for this, and those are the GBA and the IQWiG. The GBA is a federal joint committee and decides what treatments, drugs, procedure, and diagnostics are covered in Germany. The GBA consists of representatives of the health insurance funds, hospitals, and National Physicians Association. And patient representatives have an advisory role in the GBA, but no voting rights. And the other body is the IQWiC, and that's the Institute for Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare. The role of IQWiC is to provide evidence-based assessments of medical interventions for the GBA. It evaluates the added benefit of new medicines compared to existing standard treatment. So the unknown procedure does not follow the earlier explained pathway to patient availability. So meaning the steps of the market authorization to market access to patient availability. In the unknown, there is direct patient availability after market authorization, and after the medicine is made available, the market access procedures will start. So what we see here is that the unknown procedure and the direct patient availability grants a quick and rapid market access of these medicines. So there is an immediate patient availability, but how does the market access process really look like? So to start, indeed, there is the patient availabilities immediately, but there is no price available, or there isn't a agreed upon price. But in the first period, and the first period consists of 6 months, the price is set freely, or is freely set by the pharmaceutical company. And during this time, the Amnen assessment takes place, which follows the more universal set pathway of the market access. So the dossier submission, and the dossier submission needs to be done within the first month of market entry, and the dossier needs to be submitted by the GBA. After that, the value assessment, and the dossier is assessed by the IQWiC. And they evaluate the added benefit of the new medicine compared to appropriate comparators, so other existing treatments in Germany, and which are defined by the GBA. And after that, the GBA gives out the final ruling on the extent of the added benefit. So they assess, all right, how much added benefit does this new medication or medicine give to our healthcare system? And they can be either major, considerable, minor, or none. And based on this decision, price negotiations begin between the pharmaceutical companies and the health insurer funds, which were also a part of the GBA. So if a consensus is reached, the negotiated reimbursement price takes effect starting from the 7th month, so after the free pricing period. And if no agreement is reached, an arbitration board will determine the final price. So in Germany, we see that there is a quick patient access because immediate patient access or market access is granted after the EMA approves and the European Commission gives out the market authorization. Let's move further to Italy. And in Italy, the market access is not fully regulated on a national level, but is also regulated on a regional level. In practice, we see that the elements of the reimbursement decision take place on both levels. On national level, that means that the question, will it be reimbursed, is answered. And on regional level, the terms of the reimbursement conditions are considered. You could imagine, of course, that this could lead to delays in market access because both on a national and regional level, decisions should be made. And it can also lead to differences in access between the regions. So, on the national level, the AIFA, the Italian Medicines Agency, handles the market access. So let's look at the steps of this national appraisal. So first, after the dossier is submitted to the AIFA, the value assessment is done by 2 different committees of this body, so of AIFA. And the first committee is the CTS. And the CTS evaluates the therapeutic value and determines the class of the medicine. And the class of the medicine determines to what extent it will be reimbursed. So when a medicine falls under class A, it can be fully reimbursed. If it falls in the class H, it's partly reimbursed. And if it falls under the class C, it is not reimbursed. And the other committee is the CPR. And the CPR evaluates the economic considerations, such as the cost effectiveness. After that, the price is negotiated on, and the price will be negotiated between the pharmaceutical companies and the CPR. And eventually, based on the value assessment, any price negotiation, a universal price will be agreed upon, which is applicable in all of Italy. And also the reimbursement rate based on the class of medicine is determined, and eventually it is published to the regional level, or to the whole country, of course, as a whole. So the regional level or the regional bodies can take this up and go further with this. So on a national level, the price is set, and also it is set and determined to what extent the treatment should be reimbursed. But however, on regional level, market access processes could also take place and are there performed by the regional authorities, agencies, and bodies. They can also go through the steps. Normally, the new dossier isn't needed, and normally a new value assessment is also not needed. However, when regional bodies find it necessary to assess the therapeutic value of a medicine, it could be evaluated within the local healthcare context of that region in order to consider more of the regional priorities and other care pathways. However, what they can do are price negotiation. Well, indeed, the price and the normal price for Italy is set on a national level and is set by the IFA and could not really be changed regionally. Regional bodies can negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies on additional agreements. Think about discounts, or think about volume agreements, but more on these types of agreements, or in other words, the managed entry agreements later on. And last, they can decide on reimbursement. And regions determine how and where the medicine will be made available, and who can receive the medicine, and under what circumstances the medicine will become available. For instance, only in hospitals or only in specialized hospitals. And they can also decide whether to add the medicine to the official list of medicine that could be prescribed and used, and how the medicine and its outroll or the practical implementation will look like. So these decisions, and especially on the regional level, are of course driven based on how much value the new medicine brings, but also whether the regions have enough money to pay for it. Because there are differences in budgets over the regions in Italy, this can lead to differences in access of medicines. For instance, there can be in one region a universal availability of a type of drugs or a type of medicine, and in other regions, this can be only, for instance, when it's prescribed by specialists. So let's move further to the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, the process of market access depends on a few things, mainly whether it's an outpatient drugs or medicine, so it's used outside of the hospital, or an inpatient medicine used inside of the hospital, and the cost of the medicine as a whole. So for this bit, I only want to focus on the inpatient medicines, so the medicines that are used in hospitals, because there are two different pathways that happen in the Netherlands, and that is based on the cost of the drugs. So in some cases, the Minister of Health can place a medicine in something called a lock or sluis in Dutch. This happens when the medicine is considered expensive. And in the Netherlands, it's when the cost for one patient is higher than 50,000 euros per patient per year, or when the overall cost for all patients exceeds the 10 million euros. So when a medication is in the lock, it follows the market access pathway perfectly. So a health technology developer needs to submit a big dossier with all of the information on cost effectiveness, and also on the added clinical benefit. And this will be assessed by the National Healthcare Institute. And the National Healthcare Institute is the HTA body for the Netherlands. And they will look at the added clinical benefit and, of course, at cost effectiveness. And in this process, patients, clinical experts, and insurance are asked for input. Now, further on with this information, the Minister of Health will start negotiations with the pharmaceutical company, and thereafter a reimbursement decision will be made. But these are for expensive medicines. We have also other inpatient medicines. And the market access here is fully regulated by the health insurers. And these processes are quite quicker than processes under the lock. To start with, when medicines are under the €1,000 per patient per year, there's an open inflow to the market, meaning that medicines will directly become available. Other medicines will undergo a value assessment by the insurers themselves. However, they are mostly not as extensive as has been done by the National Healthcare Institute. So after that, insurers can decide whether to reimburse the medicine or not. But if needed, they can also negotiate the price directly with the pharmaceutical company. So these quicker steps, and also the possibility to skip some steps, lead to quicker access of these medicines in the Netherlands compared to the medicines in the lock. So this also shows that in a country, different medication classes will be handled differently and therefore differ in time to access. So now I've shown you that there could be many differences in market access pathways. These could differ from the more straightforward approach, could be different on a national or regional level, and could even be different for different classes of medicines. So beside the policies on the procedures of the market access pathway, differences in the different steps of market access and reimbursements lead to differences in time to access of the medicines. Differences in the conditions it is reimbursed, so who, when, and how the medicine is reimbursed, or even if the medicine is reimbursed at all. So let's take you into some of these steps which will lead to differences in the reimbursement decision. So first of all, it's important to say that not only the market access policy of different countries lead to differences in time to access, but there's also a role for the pharmaceutical companies. Because when it comes to applying for market access, so the dossier submission, pharmaceutical companies have to make a strategic decision. They don't usually submit the reimbursement dossiers at every country at once. These companies often prioritize larger and wealthier countries as they offer bigger patient populations, so which means higher potential sales, and those countries often have stronger healthcare budgets, which often results in better price offers. But also another strategic decision is that they choose these wealthier or larger countries is that the applied medicine price is in one country affects the price in another country. So in many cases, countries look at the price that other countries are paying for the same medicine. So if a company offers a low price in one country, it might be harder for them to ask for a higher price elsewhere. This makes the smaller or the lower income countries that they are sometimes a little bit left behind. They may receive application later, but also can receive no application from the healthcare developer for the new medicine. And this could lead to delayed access or no access at all. So in the next step is the consideration of value or the value assessment. So when countries assess the value of the medicine, they're essentially asking, is this medicine worth paying for with public money? But how they answer that question and on what they base their judgment varies significantly. There are key differences in how value is determined and also how it is measured. For this, you can make a rough distinction between countries focusing mainly on the added clinical benefit and countries focusing on cost effectiveness. So in some countries, the focus is primarily on added clinical benefit. The assessment compares the new medicine to standard treatments and looks at outcomes like survival, symptom relief, or quality of life. The emphasis is here on clinical value. In other words, how much better is this for the patients? The use of added clinical benefit can, for instance, be seen in Germany. In other countries, there's a strong emphasis on cost effectiveness. This approach links health outcomes to monetary value, asking how much health gain do we get per euro spent? And here is the principle about making efficient use of the limited resources. And the use of cost effectiveness as the main value consideration can be seen, for instance, in the Netherlands. So these differences in both the criteria and the methods of assessment can lead to different reimbursement decisions and reimbursement conditions for the same medicines, depending on the country. Another thing in the value assessment are the differences in health priorities. Healthcare priorities are areas, diseases, or patients' needs that a country or health system chooses to focus on when deciding how to allocate resources. Health priorities can, for instance, be around the severity of disease, rarity of disease, the presence of an unmet need, or on a broader social value, ethical principles, or also possibly political goals. And these health priorities help to guide decisions such as which treatment should be funded, which patient groups should be supported first, or what types of medicine are most urgently needed. And the policies may reflect these priorities. For instance, by the willingness to pay more for a treatment that fall into one of these prioritized categories, or by offering a more faster or more flexible market access pathway. And healthcare priorities are often determined, for instance, by population preferences, patient and clinician input, or can be determined based on tools like horizon scanning to anticipate to the future needs. In the end, these priorities can strongly influence what gets funded, how it gets funded, how quickly, and for whom, even if the value of the medicine is the same across countries. So let's dive a little bit into two different countries which are different in their main driver of the value assessment, namely England and Wales in the UK and France. Hopefully showing you a difference in two countries is one uses mostly the cost effectiveness and the other one who uses more of the clinical benefit. So let's start with England and Wales. And in England and Wales, the most important bodies are NICE and the NHS. The NHS, or the National Health Service, is the body that delivers the care and also pays for the services. They are also the body that does the price negotiation. And NICE is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence and is an independent public body that provides evidence-based guidance and recommendations for the NHS. NICE does the value assessments and also makes the reimbursement recommendations. And based on these recommendations, the NHS is legally obligated to fund a medicine after a positive recommendation within the 90 days. So what do NICE take into consideration when deciding on the reimbursement? So besides looking whether a drug works good, it mostly looks at whether it offers good value for money for the NHS, for patients, and they do this by assessing the cost effectiveness. And this is done by looking or by using the QALY. And the QALY is a quality adjusted life year. And the QALY is a way to measure how long a person lives and how well they live, or in other words, how many years can somebody live in quality. And then it's determined how much it costs for a medicine to gain one QALY in comparison what was already on the market. And this is called the cost per QALY. So to determine whether a new information provides the good value for money, NICE has a threshold value that determines whether something is cost effective and should be reimbursed, or is not cost effective and should not be reimbursed. In England and Wales, this value is 20,000 to 30,000 pounds. So when the cost per quality is below this value, it is considered cost effective and therefore it should be reimbursed. However, we see that also in England and Wales, there are some healthcare priorities. And the so-called threshold values, or how they weight the quality, can vary. Until 2022, NICE adopted a variation on threshold value based on the end-of-life criteria. So the threshold value was in this case higher, indicating that indications complying to this criteria could cost more per quality. However, the end-of-life criteria were seen as too narrow and was inconsistent in the applications, so NICE applies now a quality weighting based on disease severity. So the priority is that the higher the severity of the disease, how more they would value one quality, and this means that they want to pay more for more severe diseases. And even a higher threshold value is considered for the ultra-rare conditions, meaning that the cost per quality can be much higher than for the other diseases. So we see here that in England and Wales, there is a priority on disease severity and on ultra-rare indications. So this example of England and Wales shows the country applying cost effectiveness, so meaning that they mostly make their decision based on the cost per quality. And you can see that priorities of England and Wales are set in how they assess a quality or how they can hire their threshold. So let's look at the other example, France. And in France, you also have different bodies that have a role in market access and reimbursement. Start with HAS. And the HAS is the Haute Autorité de Santé, which is an independent health authority responsible for the value assessment. Part of HAS is the Commission de la Transparence, the CT, and this commission assesses the clinical effectiveness. Further, you have the CEPS, which is the pricing committee under the Ministry of Health and Economy, which negotiated the price. And you have the Ministry of Health or the National Health Insurers, which make the official and final decision on policy level coverage. So, based on what is this valuation done? So the CT, the Commission de la Transparence, assesses a new medicine based on two different factors. First, they determine the SMR score. This assesses how useful the drug could be for patients. It determines whether a drug should be reimbursed at all and at what reimbursement rate. And the reimbursement rate determines how much is paid by the state for the drugs and how much must the patient have to pay for themselves. So these scores differs between insufficient to important or major, each with different reimbursement rates. So the reimbursement rate here indicates the base value of reimbursement. So that means that also reimbursement at a level of 100% is possible. The second one, or the second score, is the ASMR. This evaluates the added value compared to the existing treatment. So how much better does a medicine work in comparison to existing treatments on the market in the country? It does not affect if the drug is reimbursed, but this can strongly influence the price that the state is willing to pay, or even it can accelerate access by accelerating the access pathways. So the ASMR score is ranked from 5, which indicate that is no improvement of the new medicine compared to what's already on the market, to 1, where there's a major improvement. So when we want to look at the health priorities in France, we have to look into how the SMR score is determined. The SMR score and therefore the reimbursement rate is determined based on certain health priorities. including factors such as the severity of the disease, efficacy and safety, innovation, public health impact such as unmet needs, and the type of treatment. For instance, there's more priority given on prevention or curative treatment. So, with the example of France, we see that the clinical benefit and the clinical added value are the most important factors that drive the decision-making process in France. However, here it is good to say that in France, cost-effectiveness analyses do take place in particular situation. However, the main driver for the decision-making are these two factors or these two scores, the SMR and the ASMR. So, moving further to the differences in negotiation. So, the negotiation takes place to ensure patient access to new medicines while balancing this with affordable prices and to keep the healthcare cost and budget sustainable. In the essence, the negotiation focuses on the question what the price of the medicine should be in that country. And that is, of course, everywhere the same. However, what is on the table can differ extensively. And hereby I mean with under what terms should the medicine be reimbursed. So countries want to mitigate their risk of having an unstable budget, and therefore they are quite careful. So this means that they, for instance, want to have lower prices for the medicine. And also countries can have some types of risks because countries can risk that they pay for a medicine that do not have the expected effects they thought they would have. So there are still some uncertainties about how good the medicine could work. And in these cases, countries might want to share risk with the pharmaceutical companies. And therefore, agreements are being made with the pharmaceutical companies, just as I said earlier on the regional level in Italy. And these arrangements are often called managed entry agreements. And there are generally two types of managed entry agreements, the financial-based and the performance-based agreements. So the financial-based agreements focuses on how much is being paid. This can include discounts on the price of the medicine, rebates based on usage, or price volume agreements. So for example, if more than an agreed number of patients are treated, no further payments are required. These types of agreements are relatively easy to implement and have a direct impact on the overall price paid by the health system. And these type of agreements are widely used across Europe. On the other hand, you have the performance-based agreements, and those link payment directly to the actual outcomes achieved in a real-world use. In practice, this means that the medicine is only fully paid for if it delivers the expected benefit to the patients. So these agreements are particularly useful when there is uncertainty about how well the medicine will work outside of the clinical trials. And they help to reduce financial risk for the payer by sharing this risk with the pharmaceutical company. However, they are more complex to implement as they require data collection, data infrastructures, and ongoing monitoring. Because of these challenges, they are less commonly used in daily practice or in practice about negotiation and market access. However, countries like Italy, they have much more experience on applying them. Application and differentiation of the application could lead to differences in market access over countries. Because good negotiation practices and application of the managed entry agreements could lead to lower prices and therefore to more universal patient access in the country. So, now I've taken you through the stages of the market access and reimbursement, the pathways and into the different steps of it. And hopefully I've shown you that all of these have an influence on the eventual reimbursement decision. We have seen that different policies and procedures could lead to differences in time to access, under what circumstances access is granted, and even if there are access at all. And that this condition can be shaped by pathways, priorities of the pharmaceutical companies, and based on value assessments, healthcare priority, and possible the price negotiation with different managed entry agreements. But I still need to say one more thing, what is very important, of course, and that is indeed that access is also influenced, of course, by this all, but one of the bigger drivers for access and how decisions are made are the available resources, or in other words, money. If a country could not afford a new medicine, they won't be able to reimburse a certain medicine at all. All right, then I want to move on to the last part of the presentation. And the last part of the presentation is about the EU HTA and its potential role in the market access. So the EU HTA regulation was adopted by the European Commission in December of 2021. And this is gradually implemented. This means that procedures will come into effect in phases. So let's quickly go through this process. So on the 11th of January in 2022, the regulations entered force and the preparatory work was started. On the 12th of January this year, the EU HTA regulation officially started to apply. But not yet for all the medicines. It currently applies only to the oncology medicines and the advanced therapy medicinal products, or the ATMPs. Starting from 2028, the regulation will be extended to orphan medicines, meaning the medicines used to treat rare diseases. And starting from 2030, there is the EU HTA will be extended to all centrally authorized medicines, meaning that all medicines that require assessment from the EMA will fall under the EU HTA system. So the EU HTA goals. First, it aims to improve the availability of innovative health technologies for patients across Europe in terms of faster and more equal access to new medicines. As it was shown, time to access could differ between the countries, but by providing information on value of the new medicines to the country, the EU hopes this could reduce certain delays in access. The second goal is to promote convergence in HTA tool procedures and methodologies. Also shown was that every country had differences in the market access pathway, criteria to access medicines. But even though they are looking at different criteria, they often look at the same clinical data. So this could lead to duplication of work and possible unnecessary complexity for companies and also for HTA bodies. So the EU HTA regulation aims to create harmonized methods and common formats so that all countries can work from the same scientific foundation, even if they make their own final reimbursement decision. The third goal is to ensure efficient use of the resources and strengthen the HTA quality. So by doing assessment jointly at the EU level, countries can share the workload. This is especially beneficial for smaller countries or countries that have a less resourced HTA body or no HTA body or HTA regulation at all. So this collaborative approach is expected that countries also will learn from each other methods. And it also helps to avoid waste in terms of doing the same work multiple times in different places, freeing up more of the capacity to focus on other important aspects of access. And last, the regulation is designed to make the system clearer and more predictable for developers of new medicines. So instead of having to prepare different dossiers for each country, companies will be able to follow a single streamlined process for the clinical assessment. This helps to better plan and make it easier to bring medicines to the market. So the EU HTA consists of 3 key processes. And the first process is the Horizon scanning. And that's about the process of identifying emerging medicines when they are in the research and development phase. This helps to anticipate what is coming so countries could prepare in advance. And for instance, align priorities and also start with managing the resource planning. Another process is a joint scientific consultation. And this allows pharmaceutical companies to get early advice from EUHTA on what kind of data will be needed for the future assessments, helping them to design studies that will meet the needs of the EUHTA for the GCA, or the last point, the joint clinical assessment. So the GCA is the core of the EUHTA, and the GCA provides an evaluation of the relative clinical effectiveness and the relative safety of a new medicine. So rather than each country doing this on its own, the clinical assessment can be performed on the EU level, and now will be made, and therefore we will be one joint report that all member states can use as a basis for their national decision. In these processes, the input from patients and clinicians is further integrated in order that these evaluation captures both the clinical value and also the real life relevance of the treatment itself. And their perspective makes it helps to make the assessment more balanced, for instance, more patient-centered, and also to align with the real medical practices. All right, so to put a little bit of the GCA in perspective, the GCA first will follow the same timelines as the EMA regulatory assessment. This means that clinical evaluation at EU level will be completed around the same time the medicine receives its marketing authorization. Also, even though the clinical part of the evaluation will be done jointly at the EU level, decision on whether a medicine is reimbursed and under what conditions it would be reimbursed or at what price will still be made at each country individually. Meaning that the market access pathways and valuation criteria will mostly be the same as they are right now in each country. However, the GCA provides a common scientific evaluation of how effective and safe a medicine is, but the rest of the value assessments the country still needs to do for themselves. So how can that look like? So the EMA still needs to decide whether the new medicine is of quality, whether it provides efficiency, and whether the medicine is safe to use. The joint clinical assessment, the GCA, will look at the relative clinical effectiveness and the relative safety. So will the new medicine provide better outcomes and is more safe than what is already on the market in Europe? However, the country themselves still needs to look at things like the added benefits, therapeutic value, and also to the other non-clinical factors, such as the economic factors. Think here about, of course, the cost effectiveness, or if the country could afford the medicine, but also other factors such as ethical, legal, social, or organizational factors in order to make a reimbursement decision. So this shows that there are still some things that a country needs to evaluate on their own. But it's not the case that the countries do not have to consider the GCA. The GCA is legally required to use as an input in the national processes. So countries must take the GCA into account when they're conducting their value assessments and making reimbursement decisions. They can't simply ignore it or repeat the same clinical evaluations. So in other words, the GCA does not replace national decision-making, but it sets a common baseline of clinical evidence that all countries are expected to use. Therefore, we have seen now that many countries have already begun preparing for the EUHTA and the GCA processes by putting procedures in place and aligning internal workflows aligning internal workflows to the workflows of the GCA and the possible outcomes of the GCA. However, we don't know exactly how this will look like in practice, because currently only the first dossiers for the GCA are in preparation and will eventually become available for countries to assess. So, that will bring us to the end of the presentation. So today we have talked about the medicines from the development to patient access, where we saw that market authorization does not automatically mean that a medicine is available for patients and that it is the responsibility of the countries themselves to make this available. We have further looked at the processes of market access and how differences in policies and procedures could affect the access for medicines for patients. And last, we have looked at the EU HTA regulations and where the EU HTA fits in the national market access and reimbursement procedures. So thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to start answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this tour de force on reimbursement, on how does it fit within the EU and the national context. We have already a couple of questions. First one is, it refers to Germany. You mentioned that the medicine will be already available for the first 6 months. It's going to be a free pricing. The question is, what prevents prices from going insanely high during these first 6 months? And is the negotiated price retroactive then? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I do not know what happens when the prices are insanely high. I can imagine that pharmaceutical companies are not willing to set a really, really high price in the first 6 months, because that could reflect also in the negotiations. So when they have really a bad, a kind of voice in there, when they say, all right, let's keep it very high. Mm-hmm. Then also for the negotiation, I think the German committee won't accept it. Mm-hmm. And there won't be any, let's see there won't be any rebates or anything for the first 6 months, but when the price is negotiated, it will be retroactive, which means that when the price isn't set for the 7 months, 8 months, there needs to be rebates from the pharmaceutical company in there, of course. But that's a great question, and I really don't know what happens in practice there.
Okay, thank you. There's another question. They're curious about the source of the information that you presented today, the methodology used to get the information, and if it represents the current situation.
Yes, also a great question. Well, in my PhD, one of my focuses is on the market access and reimbursement. So my first knowledge about this topic comes from an extensive scoping review from the literature. And of course, the literature or the scientific literature doesn't reflect the current situations. So that formed really the basis of it. And I tried to add upon that with policy documents, policy reports, also to keep my eyes open if something changes up. Then, of course, I also have a great consortium, the ASCERTAIN consortium, which also have their eyes and ears in the field to see if anything changes in there. So what you can see is that the latest updates was that in the AMNOG process, the free pricing period has changed in 2023 from 12 months to 6 months. So we try to keep that, of course, in mind, but also what we saw is that in England and Wales, the end-of-life criteria were off, and now we have the quality weighting. So yeah, we have a lot from literature, but literature takes often quite some time before it's published, and in that time, there are already some policy changes. So we try to keep the changing policy fields in our eyesight.
Okay. There is a question about outcome-based reimbursement, and whether or not does this fit in what you presented about country reimbursement processes. Do they follow the same path for reimbursement, or is it different? Is this how frequently are they used as well?
Yeah, so the outcome-based reimbursement, or I would like to call them more the outcome-based managed entry agreements, most of the times they come up in the negotiation phase. When the value assessment is done, the bodies that do the value assessment can think about something that there is quite still some risk of reimbursing the medicine at all or as a whole, because there's quite some things that are quite unknown. So then one of the tools can be that an outcome-based agreement can be agreed upon, so to pay only for those patients who have a positive outcome. However, these are quite expensive to put into place, but also quite hard. What we see is that you need a full data infrastructure to set this out, to monitor all the outcomes, and it is quite an administrative process. You need registries, disease registries. You need to have doctors who can fill in different forms, etc. It's quite costly, quite some time it takes just to set it up. So what we see is that countries want to do this, but most countries don't have the resources to do this. So most of the countries aren't able to put this into place. However, there are some countries that apply this regularly, just as Italy, for instance, on the regional levels. We can see that more, I would say, the outcome-based agreements are set in place there. And in the last periods, we see that for the CAR T-cell therapies, more countries adopt a outcome-based agreement. And for instance, it can also be seen in Germany.
Okay. Someone asks, how do you think the UHTA regulation would impact manufacturers' delay between submitting for reimbursement between different countries? For example, one in Germany versus one in Estonia.
That's really a great question. Yeah, it is one of the main goals, of course, for the UHTA to make this process a little bit quicker. But what you can see is when there is already some information about the clinical effectiveness for instance, Estonia, the manufacturer don't have to invest much more money into that process of the research. So already a part of the dossier is ready there. And what always can be is that countries could ask the manufacturer to start with an assessment. So they could ask, please, we see that your medicine works. Please come to our market. So hopefully this can help countries to assess the medicines better, but also can indeed shorten the time. And I still need to see how that will work in practice. I'm kind of reluctant to say that it has an immediate effect, but eventually it would have an effect.
Mm-hmm. There is a question about transnational access to treatments. They're asking if you are able to say anything about access to medicine or treatments in another EU country if they're not available in your own yet. If you know if there are any understandings between countries on access on reimbursement.
So let's say this, when you are in a country, most of the time the national insurer or the government pays for your healthcare. And they only pay for the healthcare that is approved in your own country. So that makes that if you want to get a treatment in another country, you won't be able to get the money from your government or the national insurer. Because when they think that they don't offer enough value or haven't had the opportunity to assess whether it has more value, they are reluctant to reimburse that. So what we then see is that most people start a crowdfunding action or something just to get a treatment in another country.
Thank you. Now there's a question from a non-EU country. So there's an example of North Macedonia as a non-EU country with limited HTA capacity and slower reimbursement process that faces of significant delays in accessing innovative cancer treatments. The question is what practical approaches or collaborative models could help them improve reimbursement decision-making and ensure equity in access, especially for high-need areas like blood cancer?
Wow, that is a huge question, I think, with a lot of different paths that I can go into. Yeah, maybe I can just put it a little bit back to the ASCERTAIN project from which this is, of course, given this webinar. In the ASCERTAIN project, we're trying to look at universal models in terms of the pricing, in terms of the cost effectiveness, and in terms of the reimbursement. And what we're trying to do, for instance, for cost effective models is to make a universal one model where somebody just can put in their own input parameters or things that they want to achieve. So there are some collaboratives that's working on more of a global models, universal models that can be used by everybody just to get some answers on the questions about whether to reimburse it or not, or to see what added value there can be. And with those models, you can also learn from the other countries. So hopefully, with creating universal models or global models, we can help to improve the time for reimbursement decision making and help to show you how these models could look like and how these models can be applied practically. So there are some initiatives that are trying to do this and trying to use that. And also what is kind of what you can always look at is how do other countries make their decisions. What we see, for instance, when we do pricing, each country looks at other countries, what their price is. And we also see that some countries, especially some countries in the east of Europe, we also look at how other countries assesses certain medicines, will they reimburse it or not? And based on those decisions, they can also look at the reimbursement and also make a much much well reimbursement decision in that sense. So I would like to say keep following ASCERTAIN for those questions, and we're happy to answer more of questions in that sense. And also another one, look at what other countries do, and of course look at the EU HTA and the outcomes for that.
Thank you, Tom. Moving into different types of medicines then, there's a question about generics. Can you share details about generics reimbursement and whether prior reimbursement of branded drug had any impact on reimbursement decision and or timeline?
Yeah, so let's just say I'm not that well known into the generic field, but I know something, of course, about it. What we often see is when a generic comes on the market, and only generics can come up to the market, of course, when there is or the patent period of the first medicine is ended, then a generic can come off the market. And what we then see is that the price of the medicine or the original medicine will drop extensively because there are other comparators. And then what I think something about when there is, let me see what was the, and whether prior reimbursement of branded drugs has any impact on reimbursement decisions and or timelines. Let's just say most of the countries or the payers in countries, they try to seek, of course, for generic options because they're much cheaper, works the same, and with cheaper options for the same price, they can, of course, fund more, keep their healthcare, more healthcare system, more sustainable, etc. And as they're so the generics has no, I don't know the question. Can you share about generics?
I suppose there's also a competition dimension that works with generic as opposed to medicines they're still under patent. Because if you'd have several producers of generics on the market at a given time, there would be the competition between them. And if there are going to be different negotiations with hospitals or regions, for example, that would be other opportunities
Oh
to
yeah,
reduce
yeah.
prices.
That is also, of course, gives impact. For instance, in the example of the Netherlands, we see that the insurers themselves needs to do the negotiation and value assessment, and of course, they can have some type of preference. And in the Netherlands, we have quite some insurers that are equipped with this task. So then you can see that, of course, they will go for the much cheaper options, but sometimes there is just a preferred option.
Mhm. Let me see. Next. Um, well, we have a follow-up question to the non-EU country earlier on. Might be difficult, I guess, to answer, but if you know anything about a potential for the Western Balkan countries, and that being mainly the former Yugoslavia, to form a regional ATA or pricing collaboration similar to EU joint procurement models to increase negotiation power and reduce access delays. This is it's a bit of a complicated region because some of the countries are part of the EU, some others are not. Some have a slightly bigger population, but a lot of them has quite smaller population. So is there anything that you can comment if you know of
Yeah,
any existing
yeah, of course. I really see,
collaborations?
of course, potential in there. There are a lot of other examples for collaborative platforms between countries. For instance, there was also a collaboration between Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. When you move this further and make a bigger network to do pricing, to do negotiations, you're of course sharing your knowledge, but you are also expanding your power because you probably have more patients, which is, for instance, more interested for the pharmaceutical companies. You can share the resources on the assessments, etc. So yeah, there is a high potential just to work together and just to see how far you can put it up. So there are some examples for the HTA or pricing collaborations that you can look into. And from the top of my mind, it was only the Benelux, and there was Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg.
So it is an example that I guess other
Yeah,
region who are willing to explore something like that can look at.
indeed.
Okay, going back to UHTA, a question about JCA and the requirement for added benefits. And well, these questions, the person who had these questions were particularly concerned about the use of single-arm trials then. If they would still be accepted for review, will they not? Would they depend then on certain settings if we're talking about rare diseases or orphan drugs or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. And of course, in the now with the most of the new medicines, especially the high innovative technologies, most of them are based on single arm trials. And so far, I know is that of course all the trials and every bit has to be considered in a GCA. And what I do know in a GCA and in the processes, they often need to consult experts and also experts on clinical trials and especially experts on single arm trials. So that is also a part for the joint scientific consultation for the pharmaceutical companies to see when there's no option for a normal try and they have to do a single arm trial, that they can discuss with the EU HTA what are appropriate methods to come up with good evidence that is appropriate enough inside the GCA to compare the intervention of the single arm trial to other parts. So it will be considered, of course, because yeah, we know that it is not ethical to sometimes do a placebo group or another group besides an innovative new intervention.
Yeah, it maybe also worth mentioning that the GCA report done at the EU level will just assess the information, the decision on what's in it, on whether or not to accept, to decide, on any added value or not. It remains with the countries, of course, and they are free to request other information if they wish so. I think we're getting toward the end. But one last question. Would you be able to recommend articles or lay materials where anyone interested could find more information about the reimbursement process for all EU countries? And they would be interested in other than the countries that you presented, for example.
Yeah, there's quite some literature out there, but a lot of that is outdated. What I do know on the website of ISPOR, and ISPOR is the organization for health technology assessment and health economics. They often have a lot of different guidelines or links to guidelines of different countries. And most of the time, they have some outlines of market access pathways, and also from some countries that aren't that well known. But it's still difficult because most of those countries that aren't well known don't have any big written out access pathways, reimbursement decisions. Yeah, so it is coming, but not that much. But you can look at ISPOR for that, I would say.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom, again for your time and for your insight today. Thank you everyone who joined us today, and thank you for those who addressed a lot of very interesting questions. Great day to everyone then.